It's Thursday, December 30th, 2010. I'm Rim, and this is Geeknights. Tonight, we have the incorrigible Luke Burrage to discuss with us the historicity of the Bible.
Let's do this.
So, I know we were supposed to do a Wednesday show this week, but we were lazy, and we've got some 4 hours of Luke ranting into a microphone, so rather than do a normal show, we're just going to put up some of that discussion we had. You might recall the previous episode on spiritual experiences and atheology. This is Luke ranting about a very specific problem that seems to come up more and more in, at least among atheist speakers, where they'll concede a lot of ground that, at least in Luke's mind, should not be conceded. We didn't really edit this, so here it is in all its glory, and I hope you enjoy it. We'll see you in 2011 if Scott keeps letting me say the year.
Whenever I talk to people, and this, take it back to what we were chatting about just before, and I was at this conference last year, and this atheist conference, and there was this one guy who was this weird speaker. He was actually, do you know the Cottingley Fairies? The fairies?
Yes.
Anyway,
I have no idea.
So the Cottingley Fairies is this woman who, these 2 little girls who decided to cut out pictures of fairies and take photos of them, and they fooled everyone into believing that fairies actually existed. And
they're really good photos. Like
Arthur
they look
Conan Doyle.
really good.
Yeah, look at them up online. It's actually pretty cool. And they convinced loads of people, and it was one of those first big sort of like forgeries, like photographic forgeries that people would investigate and work out how it was done.
They just made They took out took a Tinkerbell toy
and they put them cardboard cutouts from a book, and they put them on.
They weren't
sticks
cardboard
in the
cutouts. They were actually, I think they copied onto bits of paper pictures from a book, they traced them and then drew them themselves and then put them. But because they were a bit blurry, because they were fluttering in the wind in the old long exposure and stuff like that, they looked a bit weird. Anyway, so the son of one of the girls who did that was there and was telling that story.
Oh, so the people who did this weren't little kids. They weren't
little kids.
They were like 12 and 16 or something.
And they fooled everyone, and they kept the secret for a long time.
So they're old now.
No, they're dead now. But the son
of
one of them,
time ago.
Yeah, the son of one of them was at this conference, and he did this bit, and it was quite interesting. But then he got off onto this weird tangent, and people started asking him his opinion of the world from an atheist point of view. And I thought it was suddenly this talk went into a weird direction, because there was somebody talking about Moses. And this really surprised me he's an atheist, but he was talking about Moses as though Moses existed. And for me, who am a bit of a history nerd, and once I actually stopped being a Christian, I actually looked up, I was like, okay, so what is actually real? And I worked out that pretty much all of the Old Testament, up until about 400 years BC, is all bullshit.
Yeah, there were like 10 different figures that amalgamated together could be the Christ figure.
No, not even that. There isn't any figures. The whole, people always talk about like this Moses was this figure and this figure and stuff. No, it wasn't. It's bullshit. It's all a legend. There is absolutely zero evidence for anything that's in the Bible up until about the reign of Josiah, which is 400-500 years BC.
Yeah, see, I used to think, even up until really recently, I'm like, there was a King David, because
there's no evidence.
Yep. There was no King David,
and they got that third temple and everything.
Completely not even close. There wasn't a King Solomon. There wasn't anything.
No, there wasn't. And this is the thing, people, and this is what really annoys me about about atheists these days. Not just atheists, but the whole level of discussion when discussing things with religious people or with people who are wanting to talk about, religion's place in the world and the history of this and the history of that, is that any atheist who gets into this conversation about history cedes all this ground to the religious people and doesn't even consider it.
There is a guy, I forget his name. I could find you the book because I have it on my...
Oh, is he the one who wrote the...
Yeah.
Here are a million facts.
Right, this guy, he has a 2-part Google video you can watch. I'm sure it's still up.
What's his name?
I can't remember. It might be... He's Hispanic. I think it might be D'Souza. I don't know.
Okay.
I'll post it in whatever links or whatever. I'll tell you after when I can get a computer.
Right.
But basically, he's a biblical scholar.
Yeah.
He studied the Bible, and he will tell you... he has a 2-part Google video, and in the first part, he basically does a lecture, and the second part, he answers questions.
Yeah.
And he basically says, look, there's no evidence for any of this. In fact, the oldest New Testament we have is from the Middle Ages, right? He's like, none of this is, he's like, and he has a book called The End of Biblical Thought.
The End of Biblical Studies and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's the book that he wrote. So if you read that book, it'll explain to you all of, this is the evidence we have, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest thing we've got, yada, yada, yada.
Hector. It doesn't give me his last name.
Hector. It is Hector, whoever it is.
Hector.
Something.
What's the book called?
Avalos.
Yes.
The End of Biblical
Avalos,
Studies.
That's it.
by
Hector
Avalos.
So I got
That's
the
it.
name of the book right. Yeah, The End of Biblical Studies. Yeah, that kind of thing is... Now, I really enjoy reading the Bible, especially,
See,
the-
no,
I just read-
I find it very dry.
No,
I
the thing
just
is-
read the
there's-
book of Genesis illustrated by R. Crumb. That is pretty awesome because you can see, it's a straight illustration job, even though it's R. Crumb, right? And it's in his drawing style because he drew it. But he says straight up, look, I'm not trying to be stupid here or make jokes. I'm attempting to just illustrate the book of Genesis. I'm not doing not changing anything. Here are the people I got my translations from because it's in English, right?
Yeah.
And it's great because you can see just how stupid some of the stuff is. Like at one chapter, there's like a random chapter. First of all, you see that there's 2 Genesis stories, right? It's okay, God created the world, and then chapter 2.
like,
so God created the world. It's like, wait, what? And the part that's like stands out the most to me after reading it is they tell this story about like someone who brought someone's sister and lied and said it was someone else. And then
That happens 3 times.
and they tell
in
it the
Bible.
same story again with the characters' names changed. And I'm like, who wrote this book? Even if they're just making it up, a work of fiction.
No, the way it works is that you've got in the Bible,
and it comes at it. It's such a non sequitur chapter too. Every time it appears,
Exactly. Let me put it this way. This is the way to explain it. There's actually a thing called the documentary hypothesis, which is where the Genesis and actually all the Torah it's pretty much 4 different documents which have been spliced together. But each of those
thought
have
it was
got
5.
different. Well,
That's
there's
all right.
more. There's more of them. There's the main 4.
There's also the apocryphal text.
Yeah, but there's other bits of historical text in there. Now, if you really want to read a good book, which is the history of the Bible explained, I think it's, and the other one is the Bible with sources revealed, both by Richard E. Friedman, I think it is.
I'm Amazoning as furiously as I can.
Okay, yeah. Type in.
It keeps recommending weird fucking books.
Type in the Bible with sources revealed. Okay, so this book, it actually goes through and it says, this is what this is. And they can work it all out by the different uses of the names of the God. And there's like loads and loads of different things. What's the name of the guy?
Oh, it is Richard Elliott Friedman.
Yes, Richard Elliott Friedman. So this book is
like
amazing to
$15
read
at
because
the
you can actually read the different 4 documents in different orders. Like you can go through and just read the J text, and then you can go through and read the E text, and then you can go through and read the D text, and and there's these different texts that you can go through. It's like you've got Matthew.
Oh, but
Mark,
if you just
Luke, and
stick to one text, it makes sense on its own.
Yes, it does.
But
It
when
makes
you mix them
perfect
together, it makes
Yeah, so
is
those
when it makes no
stories
sense.
that you read, that you're saying, that's repeated, where it's
a story that appears in all the 3 texts slightly differently.
Yeah.
But when they mix them together, now the story is in there 4 times. They didn't just pick one.
And okay, in the one of the best bits of this book is where they talk about the Noah's flood. Okay, and so how many days did it rain? And you've got 3 different accounts of Noah's flood being spliced together, and that's why at the end of it they release a dove, and they release what else do they release?
Like a crow or something. I don't know.
It's a raven. They release a raven and a crow. Now in
dove,
2
I don't
different
know.
books, there's a raven and a dove is released, but they would never do it twice. But they have to put it in twice. Now, the stories that you mentioned before, they could put in 3 times and just change the names. At the end of the flood story, the whole point of the flood story is God wipes out the earth and then says, "I'm never going to do this again." So they can't put that story in twice. So then just imagine the Bible being combined with another book where a great flood happens, say the Epic of Gilgamesh. They can't have another flood in there because God said he'd only ever do that once. So then they'd have to put in the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Why don't they just remove the sentence where he said he'd only do it once? These guys are not that bright.
That's the whole point of the story. He wiped out humanity and then was going to give them a second chance and was never going to do it again. That's the whole point of the story. Now, just imagine this.
The guys who mix these texts together did not do a good job. They were not intelligent.
The point is they weren't expecting that a few thousand years later that many people are going to read it, because these were just texts that were read out in the Bible. No, not in the Bible. By the priests, and it was for the priests.
This is in a time of history where almost nobody could read.
Nobody was reading, especially nobody from the other side. Like no atheists were reading, going, "Hey, wait a second."
Well, remember, there were Gnostic sects, a lot of them too. The Gnosis, the idea that there is secret knowledge that we will reveal to you.
Yeah, well, that's a bit later. That's a bit later after these books were written. But the way that I explain how the Bible was put together is, think that you've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay, all of them have got different texts. I mean, actually, within Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there's different, documentary hypotheses of, with source material and stuff from and they do have some stories in common. Now, just imagine that
they were better writers though than the
but anyway, it's more modern writers. They could rely on like the Greek novel tradition to actually have structure to their stories rather than like the old epic structures from like Mesopotamia. There's a different literary style. If you read Acts, you read the stories of Paul and then read like the Odyssey, and you're like, hey, wait a second, they're ripping loads of stuff on here in the Bible. But that was the
the Cyclopses and the Sirens.
Well, it's a bit strange. Just for example, something you can pick out. The end of the Odyssey, what happens? He gets shipwrecked and ends up in Malta, and this is the last thing he does. At the end of literally the last chapter of Acts, Paul gets shipwrecked, gets swept up on Malta, and then goes on to his final. And you're just looking at it going, wait a second, the people reading this, like, who had been steeped in this Greek tradition and all the Greek classics, it's like that would have just burst out off the page at them as a purely literary device. They would have got so much more out of it because they'd have known all the Greek traditions way more than anybody in a church these days would ever pick up on that.
Okay, so are you saying that the books that we're writing today that are just full of pop culture references, 100,000 years from now, if someone reads it, like 10,000 years from now, like a book that was written today, are they going to think that it was true because they don't realize that those are references
clearly, the people
to the Beatles or whatever it is?
They worshipped the Bieber.
Yeah, well, it's not that, but it's.
And then they'll conflate the Bieber and leave it to Beaver, and you've got these two figures. And
well, it's not that. What I'm saying about the documentary hypothesis is that all of the books of all of the Gospels, like Mark was written, first, and then there was Matthew and Luke, but they were written for different reasons. Matthew was very much a. Okay, we're the Jews, we're going to hang out together, and we're the new Jewish Christian sect. And Luke is a lot more, hey, we're all Greeks, and anyone can become, a Christian. And then John is way off in the fairyland, and he doesn't, in John, it's sort of like he pretty much rewrites the whole story of Jesus. Now, just imagine someone compiling these 4 books into one document. And this is actually what you have with modern retellings of the story of Jesus.
But in the New Testament, don't they just put them one after the other?
Yeah,
they don't actually mix them together like the Old Testament.
But in the Old Testament, the priests would have had this one text. The southern priests had one text, and then the northern priests from the northern kingdom, because there was 2 kingdoms. There was Judah in the south and Israel in the north, and they had the same founding legends, and they had a lot of the same stories. And that's what, if you read Kings and Chronicles, it retells the similar stories, but from different points of view. And Judges has lots of judges. It's like the story of Judges, all of that time should have fit into what it's sort of like.
It's got John Marshall and
what? No, I'm just saying there's lots of there's Samson and Gideon and stuff like that. And if you count up all of the stories and all of the people who do that, there's no way that they could have all fitted into that one legendary period, because they'd have been tripping over each other. There'd have been, Israel would have been invaded so many times and repelled so many times by these judges that it wouldn't work out. It's because they've collected different legends from all over, ancient Palestine, ancient Judah and Israel, and collected them all into one place. From a literary point of view, from a source critical point of view, this stuff to me is fascinating, because when you actually get in there and work out, just say, okay, it's all legend, but the legends themselves have history. The legends themselves have legs. You can read through all of these different things and tease out the truth. Well, not the truth, but you can tease out the roots. You can say, this was a legend from that culture, and this was a legend from that culture, and this was a legend from that culture. As you can tell, I'm really enthusiastic about this, but from a purely historical, literary, critical point of view, and I find it fascinating.
Well, that's the true.
But so many. This is the thing. So many other people say, "Oh, So yeah, of course, God doesn't exist, which means there could have never been Noah's flood. However, there could have been, the Black Sea was blocked off at one point, and the.
I just saw another one of those the other day, like how the Red
It's all
Sea could have
bullshit.
parted is so
It's not
bullshit.
true. Nothing about it is true. There's no reason to ever work out what Noah's flood could have been, because Noah's flood is a myth. Noah's flood was a story.
Yeah,
that
no
was
one's trying to
made
work
up.
out where the Cyclops is hiding.
No, that's the thing. Nobody.
Well,
looks-
people are, and people in
Oh, actually-
America
actually-
are looking for Bigfoot, and they are looking for the Loch Ness Monster.
No,
in
but I mean,
Scotland.
they're
I'm
not
not
looking
saying-
at other fictional
Yeah,
works.
nobody goes, where was this event in the Odyssey played out? Well, actually, it tells you, because it says it happened on this island.
No, but sometimes, but
um,
sometimes, where were the sirens? They were just in the sea. They know which sea. They don't know what.
Actually, the thing is, they normally named islands, and you can actually go to those islands. I've been to Greece a lot, and they're all like, oh yeah, this is where this happened in the Odyssey, and this is the entrance to Hades. This is the River Styx. That kind of thing. It does happen.
Oh, it's actually the River Styx, huh? All
yeah,
right,
there is
let's go.
actually. Yeah.
See what happens.
I've driven across it. Well, not driven. Yeah,
It's just got a
passed it.
bridge. Here we go.
Yeah.
Well, I think
But
the
the point-
archaeology there was a much more contiguous, people, pacing things
Yeah,
together.
I
and
mean,
I
figuring
should
out
go there.
people
With,
lived
I
in-
should go there with a ferry and a little stick,
Yeah.
and then
A
where.
stick. No, it's the River Styx. You can go with a barge pole, is what you say.
Yeah, right. That's I guess
Okay, so the point is that everybody, all these atheists, and everybody just assumes that Jesus existed. Now, a lot of people.
I don't think a lot of people.
I think a lot of people
no,
do. I don't, but
I have met very, 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 very few people who, if you say to them, look, there's actually no evidence that Jesus exists, they don't buy it. They say there must be, because they've been brought up all their lives, and Jesus, for so many people, is
Even atheists.
as an historical
There was
figure,
no-
as
even
Julius
absolute super atheists, they just Jesus and all knows it and all
the
this
thing
stuff.
is, there is no evidence from the time until 120 years later, when there was actually a first mention that someone called Jesus, who wasn't a mythical figure, because there is mentions of someone called Jesus. I mean, it's a bit weird that the name of Jesus actually just means like savior from Yahweh, savior, Jehovah's savior is actually what his name means, So it's a bit weird. I mean, it was a name that lots of people had at the time, because it was a cool
people
name.
still have that name.
Yeah, I mean,
the
there's
HR
lots of
guy
people
at my
now.
company has that name.
He's called Jesus or
Jesus.
Jesus, yeah. So the point is that there's no evidence, and the first evidence that we do have, I'm saying outside of the Bible, which you can't take as evidence because it wasn't written as evidence. It was written as a sort of like a text, like a spiritual document. Like from a mystery religion in that kind of way, and there's Gnostic roots in it. There's loads of different roots in it. However, you can't take that as historical. You can't take any of the Bible historical, because it wasn't written as a history. It wasn't even written as a legend. It was written as a spirit. It was written as a text to be read out in a religious.
It's funny though, like
context.
even if you look at other histories, right, things that were written as histories, like Xenophon or whatever, right? Any of those things. And even though those were written as histories, even those are loaded with all kinds of bullshit.
Well, Xenophon's making shit up all the time.
Right, he's-
All of these guys. They're like the earliest histories, and they didn't even have a concept.
And
like,
even
a
they're all
history
there. I can't
of
even
histories.
count the number of histories that are like, okay, maybe some of this was true, but it was written by a guy paid by the king, so everything is in
Yeah,
favor
but
of
even
the
in that
guy
way-
who was in charge at that time.
Even in that way, you can pretty much work out that the king who paid for that history to be written probably existed. The thing is, we have nothing like that in the Bible. Absolutely nothing like that. All of the texts that were written by, like, say, Paul, which were, or if Paul existed, because he would have existed as some kind of figure, but even his name is a bit weird, But there's lots of different, theories about who wrote this book, who wrote that book, who wrote this book.
We have
But
no idea.
By reading them, you can see that there's loads of people who've been reading them. Some of them, like in Romans, read Romans 6, 7, and 8. And there's like 4 different viewpoints being put forward in this one letter that was presumably written by one person. And it was never a letter because people never used to write letters that wrong. What you have is one person saying, this is what I think salvation means. And somebody else goes, well, I think it should mean this. And in the next one, someone goes, oh, wouldn't it be strange if it meant this? And you're reading it, and only from a critical point of view can you read it and it makes sense. If you try and make it sense from a spiritual point of view or from a theological point of view, it can't make sense, and that's what the Christian faith has been twisting the knickers in a mess.
Well, no, what they did
so
was they
long.
had all those conventions where they decided, right?
Yeah,
When there
exactly.
Was, they were
that was
like
300 years later. That was way after any of the. Well, not all of this stuff was written, because there's a lot of stuff which is written very, very late. But even the earliest date for the earliest date anyone can ever say that Mark could have been written is after the fall of Jerusalem. So it would have been after like 70 AD, say like 80 AD or something like that.
Yeah.
That's way back. But that's a long time after Jesus is said to have died. But even then, if you look at it, how do we know how old Jesus was when he died? Because none of the historical figures match up. We don't actually know his age. The only way they infer it is by how many times he went to the temple in Jerusalem after he turned 30.
Yeah, speaking of the
it's one
temple,
of those weird things is that
speaking of the temple in Jerusalem, right?
I was going to say my favorite piece of evidence for all this is the fact that the Romans. There's a lot of archaeological evidence and writings of the Romans and this happened and this happened and this happened.
Yeah.
And they never really mention this Jesus guy. All they mention are a couple of Jewish revolts that they put down.
The thing is, there are people mentioned in the New Testament who did exist. Some of the, some of the different people did. Like
people
John
who
the
are
Baptist. John the Baptist probably existed.
People who argue with me will use things like that and say, "See, it's historical. Look, here's a reference."
No, you can't do it. Probably the brother of Jesus, or the person who was called the brother of Jesus, James. He probably existed because he's mentioned in other places. So now you're saying, okay, John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin, probably existed, or someone of that name. James the Just, who is called, who is as portrayed as Jesus' brother in the New Testament. That's how I would put it that way. He is a historical figure, or the best we can tell, but Jesus is never mentioned until 120 years later. You're like, wait a second, and then you realize that if you look at it from a historical point of view, like with the growth of the early church, there was a cult of John the Baptist, there was a cult of James the Just, and there was a cult of Jesus, and the Jesus cult was growing, and they were just like, oh, didn't you know? Check it out, guys. John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin. And they're like, really, was he? It's like, yeah, he was teaching the same kind of thing. Look at this. He actually said, John the Baptist baptized Jesus and said, yeah, you're the guy that we've been waiting for. And they're like, great. And they can join together. And it was a way to grow the church, is because it'll have a diminishing cult in one area of the James the Just cult and a diminishing cult of John the Baptist. And they actually get together and they join in their little things. That's why you've got the Immaculate Conception story, which is pretty much repeated for James. No, not for James. Repeated for Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Mary, who's Mary's sister. I can't work it out how it works out. But also, John the Baptist has his own nativity story in a way that's been put in. I can't remember which of the Gospels it's in, but it's right there. And you're like, this is obviously another cult leader or another figure at the time who was there. So even if someone like Jesus did exist, he was less important to everybody else at the time, that none of the writings that we have now could have possibly been about him, because he started off as, if you read the epistles of Paul and this stuff, he's an obviously spiritual figure first, and then he was made into a real person. He was obviously like a legendary thing. Like if you read any of the stuff in any of the epistles, like any of the earlier epistles that you can actually say are earlier rather than having gross historical inaccuracies in it, it's like you can look at it and go, well, it never even said that he walked, and there's all these different stories, and you just look at it and go, this is not real. Nothing in here is real. And yet so many people just give it away. They just leave the ground and just say everything. That there was this guy called Jesus, and he was a great guy. And I know some really staunch atheists who just presume Jesus was a great guy. They say, oh yeah, he was a good guy. He was probably some peace activist. There's nothing like that in the Bible, him saying he's a peace activist. It's just they're reading into it with their new, they take all the, what the liberal theologians
he grabbed all those poor bankers and threw them out of the temple. What was up with that?
I mean, to go back, I want to talk about the Temple of Jerusalem, right?
Oh yeah, let's do it.
Because I went there, right? And, sure enough, there was definitely at least one temple there, because, well, part of it's still there, and there's plenty of archaeological evidence.
No, there was two temples.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the thing, is they tell you, right, this is the second one. But where is the evidence of the first one, right? Was there a first one, right? The first one was supposedly built by King Solomon, who did not exist.
No, there was three, because there was one built by King Solomon, knocked down. There was another one
but did that one really exist, or just
no,
that
one. No. Then there was another temple which was built by someone like Zerubbabel, or so I can't remember his name now, but read about it in like Josiah, the later prophets, you can read about it there, and that probably did exist, and then it was destroyed. And then Herod's temple, which was actually built that's
the one that's actually there.
That's the one that's bits of remains of it there, and then that was destroyed by the Romans.
That's another thing, is that even Herod's temple, right, which really exists, the third one, right, that there's a small piece of still standing, and plenty of archaeological bits remaining.
That one existed, definitely.
If you go, right, I went to this place where they had, basically, it's like a little tourist attraction. They had a miniature recreation of the whole thing as if it was never knocked down.
Yeah.
And it's like, here's like a miniature play set. It's like a model train set of old Jerusalem, right? And they're like, yeah, see that little tiny thing right in that corner, right? Yeah, the piece of the wall that's still standing is like the minor retaining wall, like a section of it. And I'm like, really? It was that big?
Yeah.
Bigger than like all of Manhattan? You know, there's no way
the thing is,
that Herod built a temple in those days that was bigger than like all the pyramids and all the whatever. And not only did they achieve that great feat of engineering, but somebody else managed to knock down the whole thing except for this one tiny wall in Jerusalem, the most defensible land in the world before they had any modern military technology whatsoever.
Exactly. You go to Jerusalem and you're thinking, wait a second, I'm the Romans like breaking in here. You're looking at it and going, no way.
No
chance. But the thing is, that's if they say that's a third temple, the temple that they should have built in Solomon's time would have been like literally, like you say, to rival like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. And all the other.
The Parthenon is still standing, so whatever temple is there.
If you go to the Parthenon, you can actually look up at the walls and you can see the remains of previous temples actually built into those walls, which is really impressive. Like old columns, you actually see that they've made the new walls, which are like 2,500 years old.
Yeah.
They remade these new walls out of the ruins of the old temples. And it's amazing that you say this is an old temple, but there was another temple before that. So there can be more than one temple on one site and more than one building on one site. But if that site actually had been built like it's mentioned in the Bible, like described in the Bible, that would have been the focal point of the entire world, like Babylon was. These walls of Babylon.
It would also probably still be around a lot better than it is now.
It was. They say that the Romans did a good job of destroying it. But I'm just saying that all of the stuff that's written about in the Bible, this. It's not so much my theory, but the idea is that the Bible was actually collected into a collection of myths, probably by the guy Ezra, who's mentioned in the Bible. He was the one who redacted all of the Bible into sort of like the story, the narrative that we know it now.
He took out all the scary shit like the demons.
No. That's all still in there. There's still lots of God action and angel action and smiting and stuff like that.
No. But this guy's, the apocryphal stuff, you got shit like Moloch and like some. There's all sorts of Lovecraftian stuff going on.
There's all kinds of gods in there. But the point is, they wanted to have a unified history for a single. They'd been invaded twice already. The Assyrians come down and then
like a wolf on the fold. Their cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold.
And they wanted to have a unified history of the people who live there. And he created, not just him, but the priests at the time, and they recreated a culture. It was like a renaissance after the exile. And it's not all made up, but they took all the legends. Okay, what's your legend? Oh, you had a guy called Abraham in your religion. No, okay, we'll have him. Who did you have? Oh, you had a guy called David. Right, we'll bring him in.
Well, I had the legend of Michael Jordan and the legend of Tiger Woods.
So they combined all these things, and that's like saying, oh, those guys were, Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods, they were brothers, and they came from the same history, and actually their son was David Beckham, and all the fans of David Beckham were over here going, all right, we're part of you as well.
And then 2,000 years from now, they go, wait a minute, Beckham was white, but these other guys, how did that happen?
Miracle.
It's a miracle.
But check this out.
A white baby was born of two black men.
The white baby, that was the mark of Cain, No, he was Esau, the hairy guy. No, so what happened is that you have this bringing together all these cultures into one culture, and they needed this unifying document. And for me, that's amazing because it explains so much that they bring together all these different cultures. Now, here's the cool thing. Is that there's this theory, well, it's not theory, it's actually written about at the time, that when, like, the Babylonians and the Assyrians and, Darius and all these other people, they would bring these people in and then move the people from one place to another. And then say, we're moving you back to your ancestral homes and say, work this ground. This is really cool because we brought you back to your ancestral homes and now hang out here and this is your land. And all these other people who are around you, this is your ancestral home. So don't worry about these other people. And guess what? They didn't take them back to their ancestral homes. They just supplanted people from one place, kept them in captivity for like 10 years, and then sent them off somewhere else, or for a generation, then sent them off somewhere else. So there is actually this theory that all of the events that happened around about like pre-500 BC that are mentioned in the Bible never even took place in that, in that area. I mean, some of them, it probably did.
Yeah,
some
but those fuckers, because they did that, they're still fucking us today.
Yeah.
They're
and so this
fucking
whole
us.
promised land.
They talk about that a lot, and I read this. It was a sadly disappointing book. It claimed to discussed the archaeology of the Persian side of the Peloponnesian, all that
Yeah.
whole conflict. And it had literally like 2 chapters on that. Then the rest was, Sparta. But it talked a lot about that exact thing. And like even the raising of the army from all the different cultures.
The whole, when, in the Battle of Thermopylae, that kind of thing, they brought forward this army and then they brought forward this army and they're different people from these different places. When they went home, they didn't take these guys back to their land. They went, well, do you actually want to walk home or do you just want this bit of ground over here that we conquered? And they're like, oh, we'll have this. They're like, okay, you do that over.
And the Persian kings would even go to the temples along the way and pray and be like, look, I am the savior. Like they try to figure out what the savior was of the area and be like, I'm here.
Yeah.
Well, they did that shit in Mexico too.
There's this whole history of these, this Persian Empire and all these different empires from, that cradle of civilization would do this to all the little tribes around them, like, Judah was. It wasn't this massive nation with these whole big temples and stuff like that. And, like the walls of Jericho, that whole story is just bullshit. There was never walls.
It was like a picket fence.
Yeah, I mean, it's just stupid. If Jericho did exist at the time, but it didn't exist at the time when it was said that they tore the gates down. It's like Nazareth, where Jesus comes from, wasn't actually a town when Jesus was a boy. It's one of those things that people don't even point out, that the only reason Nazareth actually grew up as a town, it was a town before Jesus was around, but there was nothing there when he was meant to live there, and it was only after the sacking of Jerusalem and all the Jews being kicked out and
people
them
decided that was the place.
Yeah, they all went up there,
and then they all moved there.
It's the same Jesus being called a rabbi. There weren't rabbis at the time when Jesus was around. They were priests because they went to the temple and he went into the synagogue. There was no synagogues. They had the temple in Jerusalem. And
that's the thing that people don't know. It's actually kind of like, if you believe Judaism, right?
Yeah.
It's like technically the real temple, the one that doesn't exist right now, is like an incredibly magical place.
Yeah, and that's
where
the only place it can go.
You can go there and you can sacrifice shit to God and he will give you real fucking power. It's like a fucking magic spell.
Yeah.
And because it's not there right now, we can't do that. But we have to wait for the right time to build it again. And in fact, if you go there, the only people who were the only Jews who actually think about this and know it, it's sort of like the Xenu of Judaism, right? The only people who are in on this are the Hasids in Jerusalem who have, if you walk around in Jerusalem, right, you'll see things like a big golden menorah, like a giant one in a glass case.
And they're like, we're waiting to put this back in the temple.
And if you just go and look at it, if you're a tourist, you go, oh, look, that's nice. You don't realize that case, they're waiting. That's for the temple. The Hasids are waiting to use it.
Yeah.
It's see, that's the thing.
It's like breaking
really
case
religious.
of apocalypse.
When you get to the
with
point,
this little hammer and a fire axe inside. That's what that is. They're waiting to sacrifice lambs and shit and get it on.
Well, they're like a lot of the Orthodox Christians, or even parts of, Catholicism, where, if this shit is real, the way the book says, then why don't we just do this and do the thing that the book says to do? Straight up.
That's the whole thing at the end of Indiana Jones, isn't it? Where they go, actually,
exactly.
we just need to make this tent with these dimensions and walk through it in this way and open it up in this way, and God will turn up. And then he fucking did, which is awesome. But the point is that they follow the instructions and it works. And if it really did work, it would be that cool. So all of these different ideas. Now, I'm not entirely convinced that is actually, the whole replanting a different.
Yeah, I'm not convinced to sacrificing lambs in the temple.
No, I'm saying I'm just going back from a.
Scott, you got to sacrifice $5 bills to me.
I'm going back from a bit of the tangent when I was talking about the people who were settled again after the different exiles came back. They came back and settled in that area. I don't believe from my own readings and of history and actually my own reading of the text, I think there's a little bit too much site specific to the places, to the legends of these places, because they're all going, oh yeah, and Abraham went there and he set up an altar there, and then he went there and he set up an altar there, and then he went there, and then Jacob went to this place and he set up an altar there, and these are all name checking all of the people who lived in those places, and it's sort of like people in America sort of like, yeah, George Washington went to this theater and this, and then he was here, and then he lived here for a bit, and it's one of those kind of things. It's like to make the people
this
who come from those
famous person
places
stayed in this hotel room.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing.
Therefore, you should come to this hotel and pay
that's
extra
why
money.
Abraham and Jacob and all these guys, all these old patriarchs, they all go from place to place and have their own little adventures in these different places. They could have all just happened in one location, and probably the original stories, that is what it happened. But as these stories were passed around, someone said, hey, did you know actually Moses, he was buried here, not Moses, because we don't know where Moses
is. Yeah, the New York Rangers, they're actually from Detroit.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing, or maybe not, but this is where they won their game and they had a big celebration here, that kind of thing. So anyway, to tie it all back to the thing that I wanted to talk about with this history and biblical history is that people have just got to get over it. They've either got to have a standard, like a scientific standard of history, which is very difficult to have, by the way, because there's always, you can never be...
Even recent history, we don't fucking know.
It's all over the place, because you go, okay, what actually happened, 50 years ago? And people are like, fuck
if
we
I
don't know
know.
like that. So when you're dealing with history, you're always, always, always dealing with probabilities. Now, the probability that Jesus actually existed and did anything at all,
Pretty
which is
close
written,
to zero.
It's, I would say it's probably like a 3 or 4%, just off the top of my head, but it's
That's
very,
a lot,
very small.
because that's out of 100.
Yeah,
I mean,
out of
that's-
100, there's probably 3
That's
or
a lot.
4% that the first stories that we get about Jesus may have been based on someone who might have actually existed. And I'm talking right back at the very beginning of the epistles, the Paul's epistles, because that's the first writings that we have about him. Anything after that is not based on a historical figure. It's only based on the stories that are already being told about this figure, which isn't based in history. As soon as you have a mention of a character, nothing after that point you take back to a real person. Do you understand what I'm saying there? Like, I come up with a historical figure, like Uncle Sam. I'm just saying.
Uncle
just
Sam didn't exist.
Exactly. So, I'm just saying that you tell one story featuring someone called Uncle Sam. Every story after that point is not referencing the real Uncle Sam. It's referencing the character of Uncle Sam, and you can write anything that you want from that.
See,
And it's
now,
the
if
same.
if you like that idea, you should watch Ghost in the Shell.
But it's the same with, like, all these different characters. Like, there could have been someone called Odysseus, but every time, as soon as he was written about once, everything after that was based on the character that was written about the first time. So
the first story was the real deal, and everything else after it was the fan fiction.
The first story, yeah, that could be it. But it's glommed onto it, and it becomes canon in a way. Exactly, canon in the case of
Literally.
Jesus. Yeah, literally canon. But there's loads and loads of stories, the infancy gospels of Jesus, where it's like Dennis the Menace. He's like killing people accidentally and then bringing them back to life, and he's running across water and stuff like that.
So the real Batman is all dorky, right? And then,
But I'm just saying that there's lots of histories of Jesus, fictional histories of Jesus, where he is the wonder kid who's like young Superman. It's literally young Superman because he's
walking
Superman.
on water, making fish,
he's messing around.
and
But the
wine, and
the infancy gospels and the stories that they tell of his childhood, where he's like taking the piss out of his parents and stuff like that. There's a little bit of it left in the gospels, but only tiniest little bit there. But yeah, that was all there. But they've got, oh no, that's not real. But like you say, as soon as their character exists, you can't take anything from him written from the point of view of people who believe in that character and who actually mean something to them from a spiritual and theological point of view. That can't be taken at face value or anything spiritual or anything historical anymore. So the first mentions of Jesus that we have are complete fictions. Like Mark is definitely the first gospel. The earliest versions of Mark that we have, the first. I mean, there's no nativity story there. It doesn't talk about anything. It just talks about. It's like a collection of sayings, which are probably from this document called Q. A few collections of miracles, and then he dies and rises again. But then once he dies and rises again, but then he doesn't even come back, and then there's no ascension into heaven, in the oldest versions of it. So even the earliest versions of the gospel stories that are meant to be like this historical novel form about it isn't even the story of Jesus that we know today, with like angels singing in his birth and all this kind of stuff, And so it's really weird. And I think that people should either have a historical view of Jesus or a mythical view of Jesus, but never take the mythical view of Jesus and say there's a grain of history in it, because there isn't.
Yeah,
Legends,
I think I think of Jesus the same way I think of like
Paul
Zeus or
Bunyan?
whatever,
Yeah.
or anything like that.
Now, at the basis of legends, there can be kernels of truth. But the basis of
Yeah,
myths,
they were Greeks. They lived at the bottom of a mountain, so they wrote
Yeah.
about gods living on top of the
exactly.
mountain.
There is some.
They couldn't really go up there.
Exactly.
They didn't have
but
carabiners
that's,
and ropes.
That's myth. That's myth. Whereas the legends of Greece, like like Hercules is
well,
a
legends
character
are
who-
legends. Myths are about things that don't like gods or whatever.
Exactly,
And
that's
then
what
a
I'm saying.
legend is about like another person, even if they might be a fictional person.
Yeah,
And-
exactly. But what I'm saying is that legends and myths they fulfill different functions, and because Jesus was either a myth, but he's turned into a mythical, and not just mythical, but also now a spiritual and theological person, not historical. So I think that we should always get away. Anytime anybody brings up a historical fact from the Bible, you have to say it's pretty much 100% we're pretty much 100% positive that nothing in the Bible is true except a few things which are also mentioned elsewhere. And
See,
if
now
things
the
are
trouble
mentioned
I
elsewhere,
have with that is that I agree and I do that all the time.
oh, I can't do that all the time because it pisses people off.
Oh,
so
see, that's
much.
the thing. It
Yeah, yeah.
pisses people
What
off.
can you? Yeah. and-
However, we need to rate. What's it? Dawkins says raise people's consciousness. Is that Jesus is a fictional character in the same way that all these other characters throughout history are fictional in the end,
Like
because they're
Spider-Man.
just legends. Yeah, well, you can say Spider-Man. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of parallels between modern
Well,
superhero
Jesus didn't have
stories.
organic web shooters.
No, I'm just saying, fictional character. I wasn't trying to make an analogy.
No, but there are lots of. I mean, I'm not into comic books and stuff, but there is lots and lots of analogies in the development.
Well, I
of
mean,
the-
I could pick any random fictional character and relate them to any
No,
other.
no.
Because
No.
I mean, think about almost every like at least 50% of novels you read, right? There is a character who is a metaphor of Jesus, right? You read like like Lord of the Flies. There's the kid who's basically
glasses.
Jesus. No, that's the nerd.
No,
There's the other kid who's like the one who always takes fruit from the trees and gives it to the children.
Yeah. There is
He's
the
basically
peaceful
Jesus,
guy. Yeah.
right?
No.
How many animes or movies do you see where
Scott,
someone's on a cross at one
Stop.
point?
You misunderstood me. I'm not talking about the characters. I'm talking about the development of characters. You have in Mark, Matthew, and Luke and John, you've got 4 different Jesuses written by 4 different people, and then people identify them as one guy. It's like Superman, when he first started off, was this character, and then people who wrote this radio play gave him a power of, because originally he jumped. But you can't do boing, boing. It sounds stupid on the radio, so they had him fly. And then another guy wrote in the character that he'd see through walls, and this other guy wrote in. That's what's happened to Jesus over the times. He started off as this one guy who fulfilled one function in one mystery religion, which was an outgrowth of some Jewish sect. You can say that, with some influence from some Gnostic, ideas put in there as well. And he had one guy, he was one guy, he had one function in one story, and then the ball began rolling, and now he's this guy who does all these miracles. He's got all these functions. He's God on earth. Even in the first book, he was God on earth. But he became more of a man, and then he goes back into more of a god in the same way that Superman is sometimes way more human, and then other times he's like this powerful figure who just punches all the problems out of the way, and nobody can do him. And then and there's this whole different things. There's all these different functions with Jesus that have all been brought now into one narrative, which at the beginning wasn't there.
Well, here's a question.
Or if it was
right?
there, people were more knowing about it.
Here's a question, right? So there's obviously this sort of movement from polytheism, right, to monotheism, right? But what was it about taking all the legends and combining them? To make a monotheistic
You give people
tradition.
a common ground.
Why
especially
was that more? Why does that appeal to more people than?
because the Romans did it a lot
No.
to
Let
unify
me-
their people, and that was a very
Let me go
easy way to
back.
make
Let
it
me go
spread.
back. We mentioned just before about the temple in Jerusalem. That was the only place where you could, in the end, worship God. Now, why was that? Was it because that was the only place? No, it wasn't. Of course, it was because that's where the king was and that's where the priests were, and they wanted to consolidate power and all income into one place. Even in the Bible, it talks about the different shrines to different gods. Different, there's the shrine of Asherah. Asherah was the female counterpart to Yahweh, which was God.
They always talk about you have your false idols, or get your gods out of my house,
and there are
or,
always these different gods in this thing.
smash your golden calf or whatever.
So the way that they brought everything together, if you read in the Old Testament, there was altars everywhere, and and there was these people worshiping here, and these people saying we should worship in the valleys, and other people say no, we should worship in the hills, and other people say no, we should worship by this oasis, and other people say we should worship at the river, and we should worship over here. And in the end, they went, right, fuck all you guys. What we're going to do? We're going to worship here in Jerusalem. This is the financial center of our kingdom. This is the power center. Everybody has to come here once a year, and this is where they're going to get atoned. This is where they have to give their sacrifice, and that's where it comes from. And
Muslims use that same strategy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's still working too.
Yeah, it works really well for them. Christians don't have that. Well, I guess Rome has it in a way, like with the Roman Catholics.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Well, there was the schism, and that kind of screwed everything up for them.
But I'm just saying, even now, people, it's still a place to go, and all power resides in this one city. One country, in the case of the Roman Catholic Church, is the Vatican. So having a single God, which everybody has to worship, and there's nobody else to worship. So if they did have other shrines to other gods, it would be a bit stupid to say, oh yeah, this is Yahweh's different, this is his place. But if you want to worship Asherah, it's okay, you can go and do that at any willow tree. I mean, but that means you grow a willow tree in your back garden, and you can sacrifice your lamb in your back garden, and then keep the meat, and none of your 10% tithe goes to the priest and stuff like that. So there is a really good reason why it's monotheism worked. It's because it centralized all the power.
Well, I mean,
and
yeah,
the
it worked.
resources into
It
one-
worked at centralizing the power, but why was it more popular, right?
Well,
like,
this
if you
is what
could
I was
choose,
getting at with Rome.
If you could choose,
because it did the same thing to the Roman Empire.
Scott, this is what I was getting at with the Roman example, that basically people in power were actively using it for these purposes.
To centralize.
I mean, Julian, when he tried, he tried
because people who are already powerful used it, they
Yes.
basically just forced
Yeah.
on everyone.
Yes,
The people
that's it. It's
people
nothing to
wouldn't
do-
have chosen it over the other one for any particular
And in fact,
reason.
up
It
until
was just forced
Christianity
on
kind of
them.
won, and different emperors and there were different movements to try to do the same thing with Roman paganism. And either way, it
doesn't
could have
work.
gone.
They were like, okay, Jupiter's the main guy. Everyone come here, worship Jupiter. And we're like, yeah, but what about Mars? Yeah, Mars is he's the son of Jupiter. Come on over here. Jupiter's a great guy. And they're going, what's Zeus? We're over here, Greek. No, Jupiter is the new name for Zeus. Come on over, guys. You're over here as well. It's the same thing. It happens over and over. Now, if you want to take like the natural selection, evolutionary view of historical view of the evolution of religion, that was a long phrase. If you look at religion as an evolutionary system, they're not there to benefit people. They're there to benefit themselves.
Yep, the selfish gene.
Yeah, if they themselves have a gene which is beneficial to them, they will thrive. Now, monotheism, great gene. You're going to thrive. Paying money to priests, great gene. It's going to thrive. Best one, if you're an infidel, kill them. Great gene. Yeah, I mean, because if you conquer a land and go, right, everyone here, you have to be Muslim or else. Actually, early Islam wasn't quite like that.
Yeah, well, look at the beauty of that. Oh, those specific people right there are people of the book. We're cool with them.
Yep.
Somewhat.
Yep.
So let's use them and then attack those bastards way over there.
Now, also, a great one. What if you're an apostate? What if you leave the Islam faith? In Afghanistan, you get stoned to death. You get killed, or you get put in prison in an insane asylum. That's how powerful that gene is, or that meme is, or that evolutionary unit that is in Islam. That's how powerful it is, and that's why Islam is very, very strong, because it's very self-serving and it will continue itself. Anyway, so I don't know how we got onto that, but I think we've gone on long enough. Have we
I
gone
think
on long
so.
enough?
I
here?
think that was a good one. Let me stop
Okay,
and save.
wait a sec. Yeah, let's do it.
This has been Geeknights with Rim and Scott. Special thanks to DJ Pretzel for the opening music, Kat Lee for web design, and Brando K for the logos.
Be sure to visit our website at frontrowcrew.com for show notes, discussion, news, and more.
Remember, Geeknights is not one, but 4 different shows. Sci-Tech Mondays, Gaming Tuesdays, Anime Comic Wednesdays, and Indiscriminate Thursdays.
Geeknights is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license. Geeknights is recorded live with no studio and no audience. But unlike those other late shows, it's actually recorded at night.